Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. Hopefully you had a good weekend, and it seemed a little cooler as we were walking in, so maybe fall's right around the corner. But it's good to see everyone here this morning. Just one more announcement to mention. I think in my earlier one that I said September 3rd. It's actually September 5th is the Sunday that we are starting that Q&A series. But also on September 19th, we're going to have a Back to Church Sunday, something that our leadership has been talking about for a while. It's the idea that that we've had all these quarantines and staying out of public places and things like that. But those have all been lifted, and we're just going to try to encourage some people in the community to get back to church, whether they used to go here before the pandemic and haven't been since. We want to encourage them to come back, but maybe some people that haven't been to church in a while, even long before the pandemic, we want to encourage them to come back as well. We have ordered some yard signs. If they'll be in next Sunday. So if you want to put those out in your own yard to kind of encourage people in your neighborhood to come back to church, we're going to put a few out here around the church property as well, just to encourage people and let them know September 19th, we want to encourage them to get back to church. That's after church that day, we'll have a cookout. I think maybe burgers and hot dogs and things like that, and we'll just be encouraging people to come back to church, stay for the cookout, that sort of thing. So maybe be in thinking about who you might invite, that you might encourage to come back to church on that Sunday as well. But before we get started this morning, let's pray. God, thank you so much for today and for all the blessings that you give us. Even though there are bad things happening in our own personal lives or in this community, in our world, in our country, around the world, we know that you still bless us, you still love us, you still give us good things. And I pray that you would help us to look to those good gifts that you do give us every single day, to give us joy, happiness, comfort, knowing that you are working even through those bad things that are happening. God, I pray that we would all look to you as the healer, the God of all comfort in times of trouble, and that we would help others, those around us who are experiencing those troubles, to look to you as well. I pray that you would give us the strength and the boldness to enter into people's lives, people who are struggling, people who are hurting, and point them to you, because you are the one that can transform their life. And I pray you would help us all to create opportunities to point people to you, to get to know people, get to know their problems, and point them to you as the great healer. And it's in your name I pray. Amen. Andrew Foster was born in 1925 in the small mining town of Inslee, Alabama. He was 11 years old, or when he was 11 years old, he contracted spinal meningitis and subsequently became deaf from this illness. After this, he was sent to the Alabama School for Colored Deaf, where he received up to a 6th grade education. Because of the racial segregation of the South at the time, he was not able to further his education beyond that point. And so his family moved to Flint, Michigan, where he could continue on through the 8th grade. Eventually, Foster was able to go to night school and eventually attend Gallaudet University, becoming the first African American to attend the school. He went on to earn 2 master's degrees as well. In 1956, he became aware that there were only 12 deaf schools on the entire continent of Africa. And so he decided to go to the nation of Ghana as a missionary, establishing the Christian Mission for the Deaf, which still operates in Africa today. Foster's missionary work over the next 30 years of his life would establish 32 schools for the deaf in 13 different African countries. His schools were so remarkable that the countries of Ghana and Nigeria both replicated his teaching system on a nationwide scale. In his schools, he taught deaf children sign language, and this eventually led to the use of sign language to spread all throughout Africa. Foster's alma mater, Gallaudet University, began accepting his students from his schools in Africa. And every single one of his students would go on to graduate, go back to Africa to do great things in their home countries. Andrew Foster went to Africa to spread the gospel. But he did so much more than just tell people the good news about Jesus Christ. He also worked to improve the quality of life for deaf Africans and provide them with an education that would allow them to live and to thrive and to learn to contribute to society themselves. Oftentimes when we think about being a missionary, we think about evangelism, spreading the gospel, telling people the good news about Jesus. And while that is certainly a big part of being a missionary, fulfilling the Great Commission, that isn't all of it. The Great Commission is more than just people or getting people to put their faith in Jesus. It is a renewal of the cultural mandate that God gave to people all the way back in Genesis chapter 1. Robert Woodbury, a professor at Baylor University's Institute for Studies on Religion, said this about the impact that 19th and 20th century missionaries had on the societal advancements, economic development, and industrialization of places like Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania. This is what he said. Conversionary Protestants, meaning missionaries, were a crucial catalyst initiating the development and spread of religious liberty, mass education, mass printing, newspapers, voluntary organizations, most major colonial reforms, and the codification of legal protections for non-whites in the 19th and early 20th centuries. These innovations fostered conditions that made stable representative democracy more likely, regardless of whether many people converted to Protestantism. The Great Commission, found at Matthew 28, is the renewal of the cultural mandate given to all humanity at Genesis chapter 1. It's not only the mission to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, but it is also the mandate to fulfill the prayer that Jesus prayed at Matthew chapter 6, verse 10. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. 2 weeks ago, we kicked off this sermon series that we've called To the Ends of the Earth. And we talked about how the Great Commission was this transfer of authority from Jesus to his disciples. He was leaving them in charge of his kingdom on earth. They were given the task of leading it, managing it, and expanding it. Jesus handed them the reins and said, take off. Last week, we talked about how fulfilling this mission requires us to shift our mindset about the reasons why we live out our faith in Christ. It isn't just so that we can stand before God and have him tell us, good job. That isn't the only reason why we live out our faith. It's because how we live affects the faith of other people. Fulfilling the mission isn't just about telling people about Jesus. It's also about being authentic in our faith by living according to what we say we believe. Now this morning we're talking about the mandate of our mission. It's easy to think that the Great Commission is just something that overseas missionaries are called to do. Or it's the calling of professional Christians like preachers or youth ministers or people who get paid for a living to do that. But it is a mission that every single Christian is called to undertake, because it is a renewal of the cultural mandate given to all people back at Genesis 1. Let's read that cultural mandate together and see what it has to say about what God expects of us as his people. In Genesis 1, starting in verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." In this passage, Moses used two different terms to describe how humanity was made in the image of God. The first word is a Hebrew word, tselem, which was a word used to describe idols or statues. In the ancient world, idols were thought to be physical representations of a god. They were crafted in what they believed the god to look like. They were little god representatives. They didn't have the people in the ancient world believed that they didn't have access to the real God, so they made these little statues that represented them. We are made in the image of God in that we are his representatives here on earth. People have access to God through us. Now, Paul picked up on this idea at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, where he said that we are Christ's ambassadors. People are able to see him and to hear from him through us, his representatives here on earth. This word tselem was also used to describe a vassal king or what you might call a viceroy. If an emperor, for instance, would conquer a kingdom, oftentimes he would capture and kill the king of that kingdom. And then he would leave the kingdom otherwise intact. He would want the people in that kingdom to serve him. He would want any natural resources that kingdom occupied to benefit his empire. And so he would then place his own puppet king in charge over that kingdom. This king would be given all authority to rule over this smaller kingdom. However, he would be subject to the emperor. Similarly, we have been given the same type of authority to rule over the earth, much like a vassal king or a viceroy. The other word that Moses used was the Hebrew word demuth, which was a word used to compare two things that were completely different. This word was used to show how they're similar. These are two completely different things, but in some certain aspects, they're similar. The word was used quite a bit by the prophet Ezekiel. In his book, he wrote down all these strange visions that he had, and so he was trying to describe these otherworldly, strange things that he was seeing by saying that they, even though they were different than anything you've ever seen in your life, they are similar to this other thing, even though they're really nothing alike at all. That's kind of what the word meant. And so Moses kind of used this word to describe how we're made in God's likeness. We're made in God's likeness in that even though we are completely different from God, there are some similarities. And God is unique. There is nothing like him at all. But we are like him in some ways. There are some similarities. And the primary way that we're like God, Moses explained to us in verse 28. We are made in his likeness in that we are to continue the work he began in creation, which was to take the chaos of this world and to put it into order. All throughout Genesis chapter 1, it describes how God took chaos and he put it into order. There was no light, and he made their light. There was no order in the universe, but he put it into order. And so we are given the authority over his creation, both as viceroys and also as creators. We are instructed to continue the work of creation by being fruitful, by filling the earth and subduing it. Now, this is typically referred to as the cultural mandate. What God has instructed here goes far beyond procreation. That's the first image that we have when we hear this. Be fruitful and increase in number. It does mean to have babies and to populate the earth, but it is so much more than that. God has commissioned us to continue his work of turning chaos in this world into order. God has blessed us with so many things. He has blessed us with a mind that we can use to learn knowledge and skills. He has blessed us with a personality that we can use to interact with other people. He blesses us with certain tastes, things we like, things we dislike, things we enjoy doing. He has blessed us with so many natural resources on this earth that we can use to create things, to build things, to invent things that help people, that make life better for those around us. We're called to use all these gifts that God has given us, all these resources that we've been given on this earth to work and to create and to improve society and to improve the quality of life. We are commissioned to work, to bring everything under the will of God. We're called to influence society and to influence government, to enact the will of God here on earth, to fulfill that prayer that Jesus prayed, your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. We're called to be good stewards of all these resources. All the resources that we've been given, we're called to be good stewards of them by influencing culture toward attitudes that reflect God's will. We're called to put things that are in chaos into order. You may remember as a kid, your parents telling you to clean your room. Did that ever happen to anybody? Parents tell you to clean your room? I know it happened to me quite a bit. Happens to my kids. They get told to clean a room, even as young as they are. Some of you, maybe have been neat freaks and you never had to worry about it, right? Your room was always clean, it was always in order. But for most of us, I would assume, probably, you look around your room and you see total chaos, right? And then, we're told to clean it, so we go about the work of putting our room into order. We would pick up clothes, we would throw away trash, we would put books back on the shelf, we would put things away in our closet, we would make our bed. It was work to put it into order, right? But when you're finally done, you have this feeling of accomplishment. God has instilled the desire to enjoy order within our heart. It's a wonderful feeling to be in a clean room, in a clean house, right? But what happens? What happens a week later or a couple days later, or in my kid's case, especially Connor's case, 20 minutes later? The room would again be in chaos, and you would again have to put it back into order. No matter what job you have, you're putting some sort of chaos into order. If you work as a carpenter, for instance, you start with a bunch of lumber, a whole stack of lumber. This lumber has a little bit more value than it did before, but it's on its own, it really doesn't really amount to much. It's just a bunch of lumber, right? But if you cut it, you hammer some nails into it in a certain way, you start to frame a wall. And then you frame another wall, and pretty soon you've put all these pieces of lumber into order, and you have framed an entire house that is worth quite a bit more. If you're in the medical field and a patient comes in sick, that's chaos. And you work to make them better. You turn the chaos of their sickness into the order of their health. If you're a teacher, every time you teach a child a lesson, you are turning the chaos of their ignorance of the subject into the order of their knowledge. The cultural mandate is for us to work to turn chaos into order in this world. And the Great Commission is the renewal of this mandate. It's the mandate to build and expand His kingdom on this earth by adding more and more people to it and improving their life in the process. His kingdom is not a physical kingdom. It's a spiritual one. His kingdom doesn't expand by conquering new territory. His kingdom expands by making new converts. But maybe you look around the world and you say, well, there is just so much chaos going on. How can we ever put it into order? There is no other figure in history that has had the level of cultural, historical, philosophical, and political impact that has improved life on this earth than Jesus Christ has had. It's been His followers working to fulfill the Great Commission who have done the work of turning chaos into order in this world through the last 2,000 years of human history. It's been men and women doing missionary work of converting people into disciples, baptizing them and teaching them to obey the commands of Jesus that has influenced the moral fabric of our world for the better, making life safer, happier, and easier for even for people who are not Christians. The Yale historian Jaroslav Pelikan said this of Jesus and the impact of His followers. Regardless of what anyone may personally think or believe about Him, about Jesus of Nazareth, He has been the dominant figure in the history of Western culture for almost 20 centuries. Another historian, Norwegian historian, O.M. Bach, he wrote a study called When Children Became People, the Birth of Childhood in Early Christianity. In this book, he explained that in the ancient world, children were not considered very important. They were routinely left to die of exposure if they had any sort of defect or if they were just born a female. They were often sold into slavery to pay a family's debt. They were considered an inconvenience until they were able to contribute to the family by working in the fields or around the house. However, because Jesus taught that God cares deeply for children, His followers did too. They built orphanages. They instituted the custom of children having godparents, that when their parents died, they still had adults to take care of them. They virtually ended the institutional marginalization of children. In the ancient world, women were treated as property. They were institutionally marginalized as well. But Jesus gave dignity to women and treated them as equals to men. And because of the church's view of women, based on Christ's teachings, women joined Christianity in droves. Jesus never wrote a book, but His movement sparked a revolutionary interest in learning. His followers founded monasteries that became the cradle of education, libraries, universities, and eventually the entire Western education system were all founded by followers of Jesus. People who were taught to love God with all of their mind. Jesus' message of compassion, it was revolutionary. His followers expanded access to clinics. They expanded access to hospitals because they built one alongside every newly built cathedral. His message of humility was countercultural. His followers held humility up as a virtue while the rest of the world viewed it as a weakness. His message of the dignity of every person would lead to the decline of the power of the state. Because of Jesus' message of human dignity, documents like the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence were written, along with the words, hearkening back to the very words of Moses that we read in Genesis, that men were created we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're all created in the image of God, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The teachings of Jesus influenced the writings of John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who influenced the political decisions of our founding fathers. The teachings of Jesus influenced the rise of humanism during the Renaissance. The teachings of Jesus influenced the political reforms of the Enlightenment. His teachings led to the abolition of slavery, fair and equal hiring and pay policies, fair treatment of prisoners, women's suffrage, and a host of other social and political changes. Over the last 2,000 years, there has been no greater force that has turned chaos in this world into order than Christianity. It has been followers of Jesus who have taken on the work of making this world a better place by taking up this cultural mandate in Genesis 1 and working to fulfill the Great Commission of Matthew 28. As Christ's followers, it is our responsibility, it is our calling to take up this same mandate in our corner of the world, to work to make life better for the people in our community. All of us, we're all called to work. We're all called to make disciples. We are a kingdom of priests. We're all called to serve in His kingdom. We've all been given gifts and talents and abilities, and we all equally contribute to the kingdom mission. We are all part of the same kingdom, and we all have diverse and vital functions. It is our responsibility, every single one of us, to work to expand His kingdom by using the gifts and abilities He's given us. And so, how do we do this? How, on a practical level, how do we fulfill this mission? Well, the easy answer is to work, right? Do some work. If you have a job, that's your mission. That's the mission that God has given you, to take chaos in this world and put it in order. If you don't have a job, I encourage you to go get one, because God has called us all to work. If you're retired, I encourage you to find something to do. Maybe it's volunteer work. Maybe it's a part-time job. Maybe it's odd jobs here and there. Maybe just going over to someone else's house and helping them out with something. All of these things are ways that we can take chaos in this world and turn it into order. Maybe it's doing something around here, around the church. Do some kind of work. That's the easy answer. But the more specific answer is how exactly your work fulfills this mission. Because you can work and not be fulfilling the Great Commission. You can be fulfilling the cultural mandate of Genesis 1, but not be fulfilling the Great Commission of Matthew 28. So, more specifically, how can you use your work to fulfill the Great Commission? There are three things that you need to incorporate into your work in order to be fulfilling the Great Commission. Now, we'll close out with these three practical things that we can apply to our work to fulfill the Great Commission. The first is to do your work for God. There are all kinds of reasons why people work. Some people work just for the paycheck. They hate what they do, but they do it because it pays well. Some people, they work for personal fulfillment. They find enjoyment doing it, right? They do it because they like it. They are happy doing it. They feel a feeling of accomplishment when they do it. It makes them feel good. Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as though you are working for the Lord." Do your work for Him. If you're a police officer, have the mindset that every single day you clock in, God is your immediate supervisor. And then go about your day doing what He would want you to do. Protect His people from harm. Work to eradicate evil and corruption in this world. If you work at a retail store, have the mindset that you are working for God. Be kind to your customers because they were created by Him. Because He loves them, and so should you. Go above and beyond with your customer service. If you work at a coffee shop, make the best coffee you possibly can. Because God created coffee, am I right? And He wants His children to enjoy His creation, right? Make the best coffee you can if you work at a coffee shop. Work as though you are working for God. Second, work with love. The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Every single person that you come into contact with at work, whether it's a coworker, whether it's your boss, a customer, or a client, they are your neighbor. Every single one of them. And you're commanded to love them as you love yourself. How you want your coworkers to treat you, that is how you ought to treat them. How you would want your employees to treat you, were you the boss, that is how you treat your boss. How you would want to be treated if you were the customer, that is how you treat them. Work as though you are serving God. Work with love. And third, find ways to sprinkle spiritual conversations into your daily routine. I know that for many people, the workplace is a difficult place to talk about religion. But there are all kinds of ways to do this without violating workplace rules or getting into arguments or debates. One simple way is to pray while you're at work. Maybe as soon as you sit down at your desk, stop and say a quick prayer before about the day, prayer for your coworkers, things like that. Maybe if you're in the break room eating lunch, sit down and pray before you eat. When people see you doing this, they will know that you are a believer. And it will give them opportunities to start conversations. It will put the ball in their court, so to speak. Another way is to place conversation starters around your desk. Things that might spark conversations. Maybe hang up a Bible verse or place something on your desk that would let people know that you're a believer. Again, this would put the ball in their court, allow them to start the conversation. And third, seize opportunities to speak into people's lives. Oftentimes, you may have a coworker talking about their family or their own personal issues. Maybe they're talking about a death in the family, or they're talking about their financial struggles. Use those opportunities to point people to the hope that they can find in Jesus. And don't be overbearing about it. Maybe just quote a Bible verse that helped you in a similar situation. But these little things can go a long way to fulfilling the Great Commission at work. But maybe you're here today and you have some chaos going on in your own life. And you deeply desire Jesus to put it into order. When we get baptized, we go through a spiritual regeneration. We're made completely new. When you put your faith and hope in Him, God can transform the chaos in your life back into order by giving you hope. We're also given the gift of the Holy Spirit that guides us through this life. And so if you have a decision to make this morning, whether it's to get baptized or place your membership here at this church, I invite you to come forward during this next song. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you so much for this morning and for how you have worked in each of our lives through this week, and I just pray that you continue to do so. I pray that you would work through us, whether we work a full-time job, part-time job, or just do volunteer work, or just help people that we know, our friends, and that sort of thing. I pray that you would help us to remember that everything that we do, we're working for you. Help us in everything that we do to work in love, and help us to sprinkle spiritual conversations into our workplace activities so that we can hopefully point people to you. I pray that you would work through each person here and work through this church to make this community a better place. It's in your name I pray. Amen.